Ann, welcome into the studio. I'm so excited to interview you. I'm fascinated with acupuncture and I'm really looking forward to learning more for a multitude of reasons. And I'm fascinated that there's a difference between modern acupuncture and classical. So you're the ideal person to teach us more. So welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Caroline. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, thank you so much. Well, before we start, can you just tell my viewers and my listeners a little bit about yourself, what you do? Tell us something that's not in your bio, what motivates you and all that good stuff.
Well, what motivates me more than anything is the capacity of acupuncture in its fullest context to tackle any health problem at all and any mental problem at all, which is your purview too. So acupuncture is a remarkably broad thing, and there really seems to be no limits to what it can address.
I love that. That's exciting. So just in terms of your bio and what you do, you're fully trained. Can you tell us about yourself?
So I grew up in Australia and my father was an industrial mechanic, and so my first great love was cars. So
that's lovely.
That's not, I don't put that in my bio, but I love cars. And then I went to music school, went to conservatory, and I was a professional musician for about 15 years. And
lovely.
Toured all over the world. And then I met my husband in Paris, actually on a blind date.
So that's so romantic.
Yeah. So I traveled from, just briefly, but you're asking about what's not in my bio, but it all leads to where we are now. But so we had a conversation on the phone, and I said, well, I can't continue talking to this man until I meet him because, I suspect that this might be the one. So we each went to Paris, and we had, the agreement was that we would have lunch. And so we met at about, I think, 10 a.m. and by 4:30 we were engaged.
Oh my gosh. That is really romantic.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And so I went back to Australia after that. We spent 2 weeks together, and I went back and I had another contract, a Broadway contract in Melbourne, and I completed that and then sold my house and gave away nearly everything I owned, and with 2 suitcases went to New York.
Wow.
And then when I got there, I knew that I didn't want to be a professional musician in middle age because I wanted to be home with my children in the evening. And that's one of the problems with being a professional musician is that, time with your children is scarce. And I didn't want to do that. So, and then at the same time, I became pregnant, and then I had a miscarriage. So what happened at that point was I was in and out of the hospital a couple of times, and it was actually a terrible experience. And I went home. I went home vowing never to go into a hospital again. I mean, I think Western medicine definitely has its place, and it's indispensable.
Yeah.
In terms of emergencies, you can't beat it. I mean, if I had a stroke or a heart attack or a broken bone, I would be there like a shot. So emergency medicine, we can't do without that. But for things like chronic degenerative diseases, which I'd love to talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
But things like allowing a miscarriage to go its full course without dramatic intervention, acupuncture is beautiful. And so I went back home, and my friend who was staying with me at the time, because my husband has a habit of being away for every emergency. So he was he was in Argentina during 9/11, and
goodness,
he was in, I think, in Italy during Hurricane Sandy. So on it goes, but he wasn't there. And so a friend came over and she said, you have to go back to the hospital. I said, that would be the 3rd time, I'm not going. And she said, well, let me call my acupuncturist. So I said, okay. So it's 3:00 in the morning, and this man came on his kid's scooter and came into the apartment and put some needles in me, and I immediately felt so much better. And I now know that was a very basic treatment, but it really did it for me. And then the miscarriage happened within a few hours of that. And then the next morning and also he was stroking my forehead, and he was really with me. And I decided in the morning, this is what I must do. I should be an acupuncturist. And my mother had regular acupuncture in the late 60s. And I
Oh,
remember
wow.
sitting in a car with my dad and my baby brother in the late 60s while my mother went in to have her chronic migraines treated by Dr. Chang in Footscray in Melbourne. And so it was in my
you, yeah, you'd
consciousness.
been exposed to it, yeah.
Right, it was there. So then the next step was to look for schools, and I ordered the catalogues from the 3 schools that were in Manhattan at the time, and then I came across the catalogue for the Swedish Institute Acupuncture School, which unfortunately is no longer in existence because some venture capitalists bought it and decided they already had enough acupuncture schools and they closed it. So, which is one of the great tragedies of education in the history of medicine. So I read a letter from him, and the way that he explained the role of the healer resonated with me so much that I thought, well, this is my teacher. I'm going there. And when I turned the catalogue over and saw the address, I could see my teacher's office through the window of my apartment on 25th Street.
Oh,
so
gosh.
I thought, well, this is
so convenient too. Yeah, wow.
It was remarkable. So his name is Dr. Jeffrey Yuen, and he has a breadth of knowledge that's unsurpassed, really, I think. And his disciplines include acupuncture, herbs, diet, qigong, meditation, everything that you could imagine that would fit in the discipline of Chinese medicine and Chinese philosophy. And I went to school, and there's a tiny slice of his knowledge which is what I'm really interested in, and that is the complete system of the acupuncture channels. And so, I don't teach or practice herbs. I practice qigong, but I don't teach it. He's also, one of his contributions to Chinese medicine is the application of essential oils on acupuncture points. I practice a little bit of that, but I don't teach it. The only thing I teach is this narrow thing, which is in itself the most gargantuan. When you go deeply into it, it turns out to be the most gargantuan field, this network of channels. And the capacity of this network of channels to reverse chronic degenerative diseases, which is my specialty, is unlimited, almost unlimited.
That's fascinating. That's incredible. Well, let's start at I'm so excited to hear all of this. Let's start at the beginning and let's just define the basics. So how would you explain acupuncture? Define that, and how is it done? So let's start with those very basics and then we can build up from there.
Well, the way I like to explain it at first is if we think about the moment of death. So at the point of death, you have the exiting of the energy of the body. The body ceases to be animated.
Yes.
But all the fluids, everything is present in the body. All the musculature, the skeleton, the fluids,
blood.
the blood, everything's present. What's missing is what animates it. And some people describe the death experience as the energy is coming out of the top of the head. Well, that's because the top of the head is where the whole energetic system, which I liken to an integrated circuit, like in the chip of a computer, so that you could say the light of the divine, if you wanted to be, which is the way it's seen in Chinese philosophy. Well, if you're really interested, this is the exciting part. So you get the egg and the sperm, and as they come together to create conception, at the moment that they begin to exchange information, you have the light of the divine comes in, and that we call the penetrating vessel. That is the foundational channel of acupuncture. And from there, it splits into the myriad of acupuncture channels. And as long as that energy is flowing freely in the human body, it is disease-free, emotions come and go freely, the prospect or the potential for unlimited health and longevity is there. But it's when these channels become blocked, when there are interruptions in the flow of the energy of these channels, that we have illness or discomfort or obsessive thinking or mental illness. And acupuncture is the art of through pulse diagnosis and tongue diagnosis and speaking, determining where the blockages are in these channels, and then inserting needles at those points where the blockages exist, and then standing back, allowing the entire system to remember its freedom.
Wow, that's such a beautiful way of explaining it. As you're explaining it, I'm thinking of all, as you know, I'm a neuroscientist and I do a lot of mind-brain research. And so I'm always looking at that connection, and I always explain the energy. I talk about energy as well. And I talk about in terms of quantum physics. So everything you say is it's ancient medicine is science. It's all science. It's just different words that we're using, aren't we, for the same. So from my angle, that I talk also about the energy, and people can think of that as God, as whatever you want, the divine, but without that you're not alive. And quantum physics talks about that, explains it, it quantifies it, it has all the principles involved in how we immersed in energy, and it's energy that we connected to that enables us to function at our most fundamental level. We waves of energy, and basically waves of love energy, and they literally talk about love energy and give it mathematical calculations. And when things go wrong, like in our mind with the traumas, toxic habits, and traumas of life, all these things can disrupt that energy. And in the non-conscious mind, which is the 99% part of us, that is the energy can never be lost. As you know, it's transferred. So it builds up if it's not dealt with. And that sense prompts your conscious mind. So my work has been around helping people to understand the non-conscious mind, helping them to understand the signals, and then to, with their mind work, sort these things out. So what I'm hearing you say, so I'm just saying that because my listeners understand that's the angle I'm coming from. So with acupuncture, if I'm understanding it correctly, you're talking about the same energy, the love waves, and they get disrupted, but you're talking about another way of actually facilitating this process. So in addition to the mind work, you've got this incredible resource of acupuncture, which can facilitate the physical re-energizing of the body back to the love state. Literally, I mean, that's my simple understanding of what you've just described.
Yes. Oh, I think we're totally on the same page.
Okay. Yes. Fantastic. Well, that's great. Now we've got a nice common ground that my listeners can understand, and now we can take it a little more detailed. So I have one question though. This is something, because I really want to go for acupuncture and I haven't yet been, and I know that my family do. We all want to know, does it hurt? Do the needles?
Oh.
Isn't that a funny question? But I'm sure you get asked that a lot.
Well, one of my students actually wrote a book, Does It Hurt?, about acupuncture recently.
I love that.
So there is a resource there. But so the honest answer is that if there's a blockage in the body and you insert a needle there, you will definitely feel a sensation there. And the purpose of that is to draw your attention to that blockage so that you can let it go. Okay. And I liken it to, if you were to kneel on the floor so that your bottom was on your heels, right? And if you were to sit there a very long time, and then, so you're, I don't know, playing cards on the floor or something like that.
Yeah.
And then you suddenly stand up and you go, oh my goodness, that hurts.
Yes.
And you haven't done any injury to yourself. It's simply the blood and fluids coming back into the musculature, as you know.
Absolutely, yes.
And it's the same with the acupuncture point. So you put the needle in the point, and that point has been starved of energy flow for a long time, perhaps. And as the energy in the blood starts to flow more freely and adequately through that point, it's uncomfortable, and then it starts to flow freely. And so it could be just the insertion, but it might give you a sensation that's not very pleasant for a few minutes, and then once it starts to flow, it's extremely relaxing.
That's amazing. That's kind of like the same thing when you're dealing with a trauma or an issue or a toxic habit. You've got to get uncomfortable first. So if you've got to get uncomfortable to face that issue first, and then it gets, once you work through the process. Same thing with surgery. They've got to cut you up to fix you up. So the principle, it's the same principle, isn't it? But except it's not as, same principle. Okay, so then do you want to talk about advanced acupuncture first, or do you want to talk about the degenerative diseases, or how do you want to handle?
Oh, well, maybe advanced acupuncture might be the way to go first.
Okay, good.
Because the chronic degenerative diseases follow from that advancement. Okay. But
sounds
really,
good.
Advanced acupuncture is acupuncture as it was understood and explained in the Han Dynasty. So that's the period, and actually you could stretch that a little bit, but the Han Dynasty extends from the 2nd century BCE to the the 2nd century CE or AD, however you want to put it. So those 400 years are the golden years of acupuncture. And in that time, all the channels of acupuncture were in use, and there are about 66 of them. And they remained in use until the end of the Tang dynasty, which will be about the 11th century. And then a strange thing happened in the Song dynasty in the 11th and 12th centuries. It was a prudish time, like a Victorian era almost. And so it was, well, let's not talk about feelings too much. Let's not talk about emotions too much. It was a stiffer time. And so they actually eradicated most of the channels of acupuncture, and they left intact. They left about 20. So the channels that treated chronic degenerative diseases and the channels that freed the emotions, that stabilized the emotions, disappeared, along with the channels that govern immunity. So by the time we reach the 20th century, we've had 1,000 years without the use of those channels. And the Song dynasty editions of the classical texts, where all this information sat, were omitted these previous channels, these original channels. And so what we have in the 20th century, 21st century, is editions of the classical texts that are missing so much information.
Wow.
And so the only way that you can gain access to this information is through an oral lineage. Someone had to have kept, or a group of people had to have kept this information by almost by like storytelling in Ireland, right? Which is how the tradition is. So my teacher, Dr. Yuen, is the 88th generation of the continuous transmission of this information.
Wow. So it's obviously in books and things now as well. It's been written down.
Well, I wrote it down. Yes, I wrote it. So my teacher took a vow not to write books. Right. So it's in some people in the tradition have written books, and some people have not. My teacher vowed not to, and I took a stance that if it's not written down, then with the death of my teacher, it'll
end. Yeah.
So I went out on a limb and wrote as much of the teachings about this tiny sliver that I teach down. So it is, some of it is written down. Yes, I can say that now, which
That's good. Yeah.
I think it's a vital thing.
Yeah. So it's necessary to train up the next generation. So
yeah, that's most of my work is traveling around the world and teaching the use of these channels. Wow. So advanced acupuncture simply means the restoration of the ancient and the re-implementation of that beautiful, vast medicine.
So it does so much more than basic acupuncture. So your basic 20 points versus the 66, and you're offering the 66 in the classical, is offering so much more. So can you talk about that? And especially maybe because this is a cleaning up the mental mess, this podcast is very much, it's around mental health. Let's talk about that in terms of mental health, and then let's go on to some of the other things that it can help with.
Right. So in terms of mental health, the class of channels that we're interested in are the low channels, LUO, which is a Chinese word that means connecting. So Chinese medicine holds that the emotions are held in the blood. And in Western medicine, as you know, they make the observation that when people have a blood transfusion, like a full blood transfusion or a heart transplant, they somehow seem to have memories, dreams, and sometimes whole personality changes that relate to the donor of that blood. And until that red blood cycle has gone through one cycle, those changes are in place, and then the person returns as their memories are imprinted on their new blood cells, and then they return to the way they are. So there's a map in Chinese medicine of 16 points called low points, where the blood that's holding an emotion that hasn't been expressed pools. And so the technique for mental well-being is literally to get a lancet, to get a tiny, like a diabetic lancet, and to go to these points and allow a tiny amount of blood to release from that point. And that stimulates the release of that emotion and frees the channel that's governing that emotion.
Oh, wow. So that's this advanced part of this advanced, not really used form of acupuncture.
Yes, that practice has been missing for a very long time. I might say also, when the communists came to power in China in the late 40s, Chairman Mao, and acupuncture had been banned before that, but
Oh, wow.
Mao, he gathered 200 doctors together and said, we're going to reinstigate acupuncture, and we want you to gather together and devise a modern form of acupuncture where we can teach it easily, it can be spread throughout this vast populace, and it can be practiced on many people at one time. And so they came up with these, what they call patterns, 80 collections of points for patterns, which is very, very useful if you have to deal with a lot of people all at once, or you have a few people traveling through the countryside and they've got to treat people quickly.
Yeah.
When Nixon went to China in 74, maybe 73, his assistant, James Reston, had appendicitis. And so he was rushed to hospital. And the next morning, he made the front page of the New York Times because he had had this appendectomy with acupuncture anesthesia, with no modern anesthesia.
My goodness.
So that
I didn't know that.
So it started a frenzy in the United States about acupuncture, and within 10 years, schools had cropped up all over the United States, and that process began. But what they imported were these 80 patterns. They imported what Chairman Mao called traditional Chinese medicine to almost to hide the fact that it was modern and not traditional. So, and that's what came into the United States. And what's missing from this, and not to denigrate it, and millions of people have benefited from that medicine, but there's so much more. It's so much grander. And the capacity of the medicine for mental health is really very, very strong.
Well, that's the little pricks of the blood that you were talking about for the mental health. And it's just, would you do the other parts of acupuncture as well, or would you just do that, or does it depend? Do you do like a profile on a person, work out what's okay? So it's all very diagnostic.
Very diagnostic. There's pulses. The act of taking the pulses is very complicated. Incidentally, you might be interested. The location of the points. You might have heard of people like teenagers who tend to cut themselves, or if you take it to I'm sure you know about this, or if you take it to the nth degree, even suicide, the points for releasing the emotions that build up that people don't seem to be able to release or find release for, the points that they cut themselves on, or the traditional suicide point. I know this is a horrible subject.
No, but it's a very necessary subject,
are right on these points.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So intuitively, they're trying to slash this and release that blood. It's just all they really need to do is to go to an acupuncturist and have that release, and that will buy them time so that they can work on
process and work on the emotions and everything. Wow.
Right.
Well, that's incredible. That's actually such good. I'm glad we brought that up. That's really fantastic. Well, let's talk then about the other physical things that it can, because you've mentioned the degenerative diseases, and what about, like things like IBS and GI problems, which we know are linked to the brain, and everything's linked. I mean, everything's connected in the body. Let's talk about that.
So IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, and Crohn's disease, and gastric reflux, and all these conditions. GI issues, which are very common in our culture. So the first step would be to change the diet. But once you get into treatment, that's my husband's purview, by the way. He's a Chinese medical dietitian. So you start with the diet, and then in acupuncture, what you're looking to do is to calm down the immune system, to say, okay, so now we've removed this irritant from the diet, and it might, let's say it's gluten for some people it's sugar for most of the population.
It would be sugar. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. For many people, it will be cheese and milk. For other people, it will be peanuts. Many people are eating things that they don't understand are creating an immune reaction in the gut. And then, of course, we have the myriad of antibiotics and drugs who which seek to suppress these responses. But in Chinese medicine, they see that these conditions are a result of the immune system having acted. We call that Wei Qi, defensive Qi. So the immune system acting on what it perceives as an irritant in the gut and then not turning off. So there's this. Does that resonate with your?
Yes.
So the goal of we would use the sinew channels for that, or the divergent channels, which is just jargon that means a channel that captures the immune response, defensive Qi, and tells it to go back where it belongs and to stop interfering with the tissues themselves. So there's a very fascinating mechanism called the divergent mechanism, which with a certain needle technique, you can engage this defensive Qi that's become stuck in the walls of the intestines and say, come back out to the interior surface of the intestine. Don't attack the actual material of the intestine. Come back and just be an energetic force, not an attack. Not an attack. Stop attacking. Or arthritis would be, another example where the body had arthritis is a very interesting subject because the divergent channels, which is 12 of these 66 channels, their responsibility is to find a pathogen that is wreaking havoc somewhere in the body. Let's say it's seafood poisoning.
Okay.
Right? So you've got seafood poisoning, you've got this horribly inflamed gut. So the divergent channels will go in there, and with a certain needling technique, you can instruct those channels to become active in a way that withdraws the immune response and brings that immune response back out to the surface so that the person can evacuate the problem and have the gut remain unaffected. There's a beautiful. So one of the roles of the divergent channels also is to take a pathogen that the body doesn't have the capacity to release, right? They can't get rid of it through the normal routes of evacuation, which I don't know how graphic you want me to be, but if you didn't sneeze it out or cough it out or vomit or urinate it or defecate it out or sweat it out, if the routes of elimination didn't occur because of a shortage of fluids or a shortage of energy in the first place, it takes an enormous amount of energy to produce these reactions.
Yes.
Then the divergent channels, they reach in, they find the pathogen, and they move that to the joints, to the synovial fluid inside the joints, and they can hold those pathogens there for decades.
Wow.
And when the body loses the capacity to hold things latent, then they leak out of the joints. And so arthritis is seen as a failure of the body to be able to keep these pathogens hidden away from the organs.
Oh my goodness, that's so interesting. So joints are someone who's gone through a lot of, GI issues or a lot of pain, issues related to whatever, and lands up with joint pain, but they don't have arthritis. That's also could be something along those lines. Is that correct? That the pathogens have gone into the joints, so that the energy, so the toxic energy has gone into the joints. The body doesn't know what to do with it. Yes,
you're very quick. Sometimes it takes me a long time to explain these things. Yes, you're very quick. So when the joints start to leak, then it's time for these treatments to either bolster the body so that they can keep these pathogens latent longer in the joints, or to encourage the body to make an attempt to evacuate them altogether.
Get rid of them, okay. Because if you're just putting in allopathic medicine, it would be considered pain management. And then they're going to give you things like gabapentin or something, which is very often given for something that with that level of hypersensitivity in different areas of the body. Because a lot of things that they can't explain will be, you get hypersensitivity syndromes, and very often they'll treat it with something very strong like gabapentin, and that has so many side effects. But it's just putting a plaster, whatever it is, it's putting a plaster on the wound. It's not actually helping the body to, so if I'm understanding you correctly, you're helping the body to naturally find the point of damage or pain or source, and then redistribute and evacuate or whatever. Is that the correct wording?
That's right. So the way that it's looked at in Western medicine is arthritis is a mistake. The body is making some kind of error. But actually, with arthritis, the body has made a beautiful choice. It's decided that it's going to put this pathogen away in the joints where it can be quiet, rather than allow a more serious disease to occur, which would be the destruction of the internal organs.
Wow, that's fascinating. Wow, that's fascinating. So let's talk then about the degenerative diseases while we're on all these diseases, because you've mentioned that a couple of times.
So arthritis is a chronic degenerative disease, and so is Crohn's and lupus and all of them, even multiple sclerosis. And the theory is extremely complicated. It's like it takes months to actually teach it to the point where people can practice it, but it's so well worth it. But in all these cases, the immune system has identified that it's unable to keep a pathogen latent, and it's looking to other ways to try to buffer the pathogen from the organ which it would otherwise destroy. So in the case of, say, a chronic sinusitis, which it's probably not chronic degenerative, but in a sense it is. Some people have this problem for decades and decades. So the body has decided, okay, so we may be running out of room in the joints. Where are other hollow areas we can store pathogenic factors? So it will accumulate phlegm and trap the pathogen in the sinuses, or it can create a band of fat around the waist, which we call the middle age spread sometimes, and sock the pathogens in there, keep the pathogens latent in there. And so diseases like Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis occur when the body has been using fluids to try to hold pathology latent. And it's using fluids to hold the pathology because it feels that the joints have already reached their maximum capacity for holding latency. And so as it places the pathology in the fluids and the fluids remaining in circulation become depleted, there's an instability in the channels since there's insufficient mediumship to fill the channels out, and they start to shake. So Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis, these are chronic degenerative diseases that originate in a deep systemic dehydration.
Okay, so then that's the deep systemic dehydration then creates that shaking.
Yes.
Because it's now so they've put the energy, toxic energy has been put in there, but now it's like that's kind of the last place it goes, and that creates this shaking.
Yes, it's actually the second last place it goes. The last place it goes, which I didn't get to, the last place it goes is the thick fluids. So it would be the hormones and the reproductive fluids and things like that. Once they dry out, even the brain, once they dry out, then you're in big trouble. Then you have cancers emerging. We call that the fifth stage of the divergent illnesses.
Okay. So that's the progress through from the joints to the different stages that you go through. So it starts with the joints first?
Joints first and waist. The joints and the waist, yes. And then it will start using the blood to try to support the body's capacity to hold the pathology. So the pathology will start moving into the blood, and then it starts moving into what we call the thin fluids, the fluids of digestion, fluids that bathe the sensory orifices, the fluids of sweat. Sometimes chronic people with chronic degenerative diseases often tell you I never sweat. It's because their fluids are commandeered for other purposes.
That's so interesting. Yeah. Wow. And then it goes to the hormones.
Thick fluids.
Hormones, and then the brain. Okay, wow. Yeah. So how does acupuncture treat that then? The classical, obviously.
Yes. You're asking such wonderful questions. So the acupuncture is brilliantly designed so that as you needle into these channels, the instruction to the channel is twofold. One is, please make more of this fluid, it says to the body, manufacture more of this fluid, and while you're at it, move more of the pathology to the joints. Move more of it. And as you make more fluids, two things happen. One, the body is more capable of holding more pathology latent, but also it starts building up enough fluid to be able to start carrying the pathology out. And and this happens in episodes. So as people go through these treatments for chronic degenerative diseases, they might find that they have like this unexplained flu. That it's strange. It was so strange. I had a stomach flu. I started vomiting, and I was in the bathroom for a week, and the smell was just awful. But you know what? I feel so much better.
Oh,
yeah, and
so the elimination.
Right. So it's starting to eliminate, and we call these healing events in Chinese medicine, in classical Chinese medicine. I'm sorry, and they're to be celebrated.
That's amazing, because that's such a lot to do. If I think of the principles of quantum physics, that your basic foundational, at our most foundational level, we are these waves of energy, and then that translates back into the particles which become cells. So at any one moment, we're looking at ourselves physically, but at our most fundamental level, the energy exists as well. So in parallel, so not even in parallel, at the same time, we are energy and we are the physical. And
Yes.
so if I'm hearing what you're saying is that whatever we whatever we experience, whatever we're exposed to, whether it's an emotional event or a physical event, wrong food or a chemical or a trauma or a bad habit, all of that is disrupting the energy. And
Yes.
quantum physics will actually can show that in terms of calculations, and it manifests physically as illness, and it manifests mentally as mind issues, and our body constantly warns us. In my field, I teach people to recognize the warning systems as emotional, physical, and bodily warning signals in terms of reading it's paralleling exactly what you're saying. So you're dealing,
Yes.
if I'm understanding, acupuncture is dealing with the most fundamental level. You're not ignoring that the body, that's why you said traditional medicine is dealing with the physical we can see, but acupuncture is dealing with the most fundamental level. That's how I'm understanding it. You're going directly to that quantum physics level.
Yes, you can. We are totally on the same page.
That's amazing.
You can't think of acupuncture in terms of Newtonian physics. It must be quantum physics.
Must be quantum physics, absolutely. Well, that is because Newtonian physics works only for the physical, but quantum physics works for both, and it's your most fundamental and most accurate, and it's undergirding the classical. So that's why you can't just use allopathic, which is classical. You have classical physics. You have to use quantum physics, which then draws on acupuncture.
Yes.
Because you've got to use the combination. Oh no, that's so powerful. Okay, so you and I can talk about this all day. I can just see that I don't even have to ask you about acupuncture. I'm just looking at my questions, helping with immunity, because you've answered that. It's actually building our immunity. But just talk for a moment, just a little bit more about acupuncture and immunity.
And building immunity?
Building immunity, yes.
Yeah, so acupuncture works very much with immunity, but not without the assistance of diet, because it views immunity as being a product of fluids manufactured in the stomach, and also of yang qi, which translates as warming, moving qi, that is loosely translated in Western medicine as adrenaline. So you need to be able to generate adrenaline, warming, moving qi, to be able to create a sneeze, create a sweat, to vomit something out, to move something out of the body. And the conduit of that, or the medium of that, is fluid. So at the moment, we live in a dramatically dehydrated culture. We eat highly processed food. We eat a lot of sugar. There are 600,000 grocery items in the supermarkets, and 480,000 of them have added sugar.
They're terrible. I've written books on this too, so I'm totally with you there.
I must read one. That's or many.
We'll send them to you.
Thank you. But sugar. Who am I telling then?
No, speak. It's good.
Yeah, it's profoundly dehydrating. And then we have preserved foods, packaged foods, and we've lost the tradition of the daily soup. And, when I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, lunch, if you were having lunch at home on the weekend, there was always a soup. It would be a soup and a sandwich, or a soup before you had the right. Did you grow up like that?
Yes, a lot, almost daily.
Yeah. Yes, daily soup. And my mother grew up in Ireland. She was born in Ireland, like your heritage too, in 1932. And they had the pot in the hearth with the soup, and they would just add into the soup. And so that was the daily gruel. But the point being that food used to be wet. And when women were liberated in the 50s, the preparation time was so reduced that people didn't didn't make stocks and broths and soups. And now you can buy them, but they seem to be very laced with garlic and onion and salt and too much salt and all these things. And rather than being helpful with fluids, sometimes these packaged products can be dehydrating or consume fluids themselves. You know, garlic is a very misunderstood herb, which the culture is addicted to too. It's very hot. It will scorch fluids.
Yeah, that's interesting. You should say that. Sorry, because I've really battled with garlic. Garlic and onions, I do not cook with them because I react to them. So I've cut them out.
Your body tells you.
Yeah. When I have them, it's awful. So I just don't have them. I don't cook with them.
That's wonderful. We don't cook with garlic or onions either. Although my son is 16 and he's very rebellious. So he now gets garlic in the supermarket and brings it home.
Cooks with it.
And it says so there, you know.
It's very rebellious, cooking with garlic.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, gosh.
Yes, I guess I should be grateful it's not worse than that. But
yeah.
So without a wet diet, and really the most wonderful way to start the day in terms of Chinese medicine is with congis. And congee is just Chinese for soup, like rice soup or millet soup. And these fluidy foods create the moisture that needs to be accumulated in order to keep the immune system at the ready. And this is not equated to water. Water won't do it. Water is extremely important. It's very important that we drink water, but water is a flusher. It engages the flushing mechanism of the body and it cleanses us, and that's extremely important, but it is not really a foundational hydrator. It cleanses, but to truly hydrate, we need two things. We need what we call busy fluids, which is really wet food, which when you eat it, it has to be retained in the gut in order to be digested. And so the longer that fluid can stay in the gut, the more absorption, the more absorption you have of those fluids. And so the wet foods allow a deep, deep hydration. And the other thing is saturated fat, which the culture is allergic to too.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
important to say. I'm so glad we eat a lot of soup and a lot of saturated fat in our diet. So I feel very justified listening to you. It's like those are, especially my eldest daughter, she makes the best soups ever. And she just makes them every day, literally almost every day. She'll have them as part of her diet, which is really fantastic. So this is so exciting. Okay, so let's just get to some basics to sort of bring this to, there's so much more we can converse about, but what should people know to prepare for their first session? And the other thing is I'd also like to know, do you have I've looked at your website, do you have a list of people that practice this, that people can get there? How would people get to a therapist that does acupuncture the classical way? So let's start first with preparation, and then how do people get to find people like yourself?
So if you're going to an acupuncture session, you need loose clothing so that the acupuncturist can pull your pants up above your knee, say, and they can move your T-shirt up or whatever. So comfortable, loose clothing is. The second thing is not to expect a miracle. So many people think that acupuncture is magic, and it's definitely not magic. It takes work. On the other hand, if you're going to acupuncture and after, say, one session you don't feel a shift, but you know what, it's one session, but I think I feel quite different actually, and you can't quite put your finger on, you're doing well. But after 3 sessions you should feel quite different, and if you're not, you're going to the wrong person. That's really
clear. That's very clear.
Yeah. So it's not something that you need to do every week for the rest of your life. It's not that kind of health practice. In fact, what we're looking for as acupuncturists, responsible acupuncturists, we're looking to liberate people so that they heal from their illnesses and off they go. And when an acupuncturist is using all the channels of acupuncture, they can tailor a treatment so effectively that many diseases will not be present at the end of 3 months. Now,
3 months.
And many diseases can disappear in that length of time.
Wow.
If the diet is on board.
Yeah.
So if someone's coming for, let's say, gastric reflux, and they will not give up their nightly chocolate, right? And that's creating so much stimulus, so much heat in the gut that's creating this irritation. Then
you can't do anything. Yeah.
No, you could have acupuncture once a week for years, and if your diet is not matching the intention of the treatments, then
that's so important. So the diet needs to match the intention of the treatment, and then you're going to get that benefit. You should feel something within the third session. Otherwise, you're the wrong therapist. And within 3 months, most of the issues should be, so it's like a 3-month period, and then most of those issues that you're dealing with should have gone away. So it's not like something you have to do forever. And maybe a new thing comes and you go for that. So is that correct?
Yeah. When I say most of the issues should be gone, I mean the ones that are causing distress should go quiet. They should go quiet, and which means that the immune system is being asked to just calm down while we work underneath that, and that may take longer.
That's fascinating, because the neuroplasticity research that I do on long-term, how long it takes for memories to change, and it takes literally 9 to 12 weeks. So that's when you see the major sustainable changes occurring. And that's what you're saying, around about a sort of 9 to 12 week period. And then it should have quietened it down and started getting the body to fight it itself, which is fascinating. That's amazing. Okay, so how can people find out more about you, about what you do, and how can they find a therapist, an acupuncturist that is going to do the classical acupuncture?
Well, they can be in touch with my assistant at anncecil-sterman.com and write to Mark, and he keys into the zip code into the database and sees if he can find people. I also have a lot of students in Europe and Australia, and so we can often pair people up with my students and with practitioners that we know, and happy to do that.
That's fantastic. That's absolutely wonderful. And just in terms of on an interesting scientific side, I know UCLA has a whole center for functional medicine, and they're very, very well known for their acupuncture there. I was wondering if you know much, and I know they do research and all kinds of stuff. I was wondering if you knew much about what they're doing there, and if they're doing the classical, or
I don't know about that. So no, I don't know about that. But what I can say about research is, if the research is of the type where, okay, so we think that these 5 points help with headaches, and then they put those 5 points into 50 people, and they say, it really only helped 23 of them. It didn't help 50 of them. That is not acupuncture. Acupuncture is totally individualized. So those 50 people with headaches
may have causes.
It could be 50 different causes.
So you have to have 50 different treatments for you to actually say whether it's working. That's really interesting. Really interesting. So have there been many studies done on the classical? Not.
No.
No, because it's so individualized and it's so new again. Okay. And in the modernized version, have there been many? I mean, I've seen quite a few studies, but it's done in the way you've just described, which is that accurate.
Right. They're saying, well, if acupuncture works, then these points should treat this condition, and that's simply not. It's quantum physics. It's not Newtonian. You can't measure it like that.
You can't measure it like that. It's individual case studies. It's the same approach I've taken in my research. Even though we do double-blind, random controlled studies, we look at the individual case study. So we do single subject design within that. So you're looking at as each individual person. Yes, there's certain broad comparisons that you can make, but you actually have to look at the individual as a comparison to themselves to get a true reflection of what changes are actually happening, which is fascinating. And that's how it should be. All of us are so unique. No one has the same experience. And that's so that's so important. This has been absolutely fascinating. So what is your website? Where can people find out more about you? We will put this your link in the show notes.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. The website is anncecil-sterman.com. It's Ann with no E.
That's wonderful. And if people want to, do you still run the school? Can people come and learn how to?
They can. My website has all learning opportunities, and yes, and there's more material going up every day during this period, actually.
To help people. That's wonderful with over COVID. Okay, that's wonderful. Right. Well, thank you so much. This has been absolutely fascinating, and I feel like I need to have a lot more discussions with you. So I'd love to invite you back again sometime.
It's been so exciting to talk to somebody who's like locking into it immediately. Thank you so much.
Oh,
Thanks, Caroline.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.